I still remember the exact moment my life changed. Not because I became rich, not because I won anything, but because one ordinary Tuesday morning, I looked at my phone and saw a number that should not have existed, a number so large that I thought my banking app had crashed. $22 million. 22 wins in thousand, sitting in my account. And the worst part? It wasn't mine. At first I laughed, seriously. I thought it had to be some kind of technical error. Maybe the app was showing someone else's balance. Maybe there was a glitch. Maybe I needed coffee. I refreshed the screen, the number stayed. I closed the app, opened it again. Still there, $22 million. My heart started pounding. I checked my transaction history. There it was, an incoming wire transfer. Completed, verified, processed. $22 million. I stared at the screen so long that my coffee went cold. My name is Ethan Carter. At the time, I was 36 years old. I wasn't poor, but I definitely wasn't rich. I owned a small accounting business in Ohio. Most months were comfortable. Some months were stressful. Like millions of other people, I worried about bills, taxes, payroll, and keeping my business alive. My entire savings account barely crossed six figures. Then suddenly, $22 million appeared. It felt unreal. Like one of those stories people tell online. Stories that always sound fake. Yet somehow, it was happening to me. I sat in silence for nearly 10 minutes. Then another thought hit me. What if someone made a mistake? What if this money belonged to another person? What if somebody was sitting somewhere, panicking because his $22 million had vanished? That thought changed everything. Because no matter how shocking the situation was, I knew one thing. I couldn't keep it. Not even for a second. So I picked up my phone. And I called the bank. If only I knew what that decision would cost me. The customer service representative sounded half asleep. "Thank you for calling. How may I help you today?" I explained the situation. There was silence, then a small laugh. "Sir, could you repeat that?" I did. More silence. Then suddenly her tone changed. Professional, serious, concerned. She asked me to verify my identity. Then she put me on hold. 5 minutes later, another person joined the call. Then another. Then another. Before long, I was speaking with a manager. The manager sounded shocked. "Mr. Carter, can you confirm you're seeing a deposit of $22 million? "Yes." "And you're reporting it voluntarily?" "Of course." The man paused, almost as if he wasn't used to hearing that answer. "Thank you for your honesty," he said. "We'll investigate immediately." I remember smiling. I felt good. I felt proud. I believed I was doing the right thing. The manager assured me the funds would likely be reversed once the source was identified. He thanked me again. The call ended, and I went back to work. Problem solved, or so I thought. 3 hours later, my phone rang. The bank again. They had more questions. Where had I been recently? Had I spoken with any large corporations? Had I received any unusual emails? Did I know anyone connected to international investments? The questions felt strange, but I answered them all. I had nothing to hide. The call lasted nearly 40 minutes. When it ended, I figured that was the end of it. Then the next day came, and things started getting weird. Really weird. The following morning, I tried using my business account. The transaction failed. I tried again, failed, then again, failed. I logged into my banking portal. A warning message appeared. Account restricted. I frowned. That made no sense. I called the bank immediately. After being transferred 4 times, someone finally explained. "Your accounts are currently under review." "What review?" "We can't discuss details." I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was ridiculous. I reported the money. "Yes, sir." "I called you." "Yes, sir." "So why is my account restricted?" "I'm sorry, but I don't have that information." That answer would become very familiar. Over the next week, I heard it dozens of times. Nobody had information. Nobody knew anything. Nobody could help. Meanwhile, my business began suffering. Payroll payments were delayed. Vendor transactions were blocked. Automatic payments stopped processing. Clients started calling. Employees started asking questions, and every time I contacted the bank, I got the same response. Under review. The situation became worse every day. Then something happened that truly scared me. A longtime client called. "Ethan, what exactly is going on?" "What do you mean?" "I received a call asking questions about you." My stomach dropped. "What kind of questions?" The client hesitated, then answered. "They asked if you'd ever been involved in financial misconduct." I nearly dropped the phone. Financial misconduct? Where was this coming from? I had spent my entire career building trust. My reputation was everything. And now strangers were calling my clients, asking questions, planting doubts. I couldn't understand it. All because I had reported money that wasn't mine. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. And deep down, a terrible feeling began growing. I wasn't being treated like the person who found a mistake. I was being treated like a suspect. 2 weeks later, I was invited to a meeting. Not requested, not suggested, invited. The kind of invitation that doesn't feel optional. The meeting took place at a large regional office. I arrived expecting answers. Instead, I walked into an interrogation. 3 people sat across from me. Lawyers, compliance officers, investigators. None of them smiled. One slid a file across the table. My name was printed on the front. A thick file, far thicker than it should have been. I stared at it, then looked back up. What is this? One investigator folded his hands. We're trying to understand your involvement. My involvement in what? The transfer. I blinked. What involvement? The $22 million. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then I laughed. Again. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. I reported it. Yes. I called immediately. Yes. I asked you to take it back. Yes. The investigator nodded. Then asked a question that stunned me. Could reporting it have been an attempt to create plausible deniability? The room went silent. I stared at him. Certain I had misunderstood, but I hadn't. He was serious, completely serious. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man continued asking questions. Question after question. Each one sounding more absurd than the last. Had I coordinated with anyone? Had I expected the transfer? Had I communicated with foreign entities? Had I planned to move the money later? It felt insane, like reality had broken. And somehow I had become the villain in my own story. When the meeting finally ended, I walked out exhausted, angry, confused, and for the first time afraid, because something wasn't adding up, not even close. 3 days later, the truth began to crack open, completely by accident. A former colleague named Marcus called me. Marcus worked in banking compliance. We weren't close friends anymore, but we'd known each other for years. His voice sounded nervous. "Ethan, I probably shouldn't be calling." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" He lowered his voice. "I heard your name. Where?" "Internal discussions." I froze. "What discussions?" Marcus hesitated, then said something that changed everything. The transfer wasn't a simple mistake. Every hair on my arm stood up. "What are you talking about?" "I don't know all the details." "Then tell me what you do know." A long silence unfollowed. Finally, he spoke. "Someone important is involved." "Important how?" "Very important." I felt my pulse racing. Marcus continued. "The money was never supposed to end up in your account." "No kidding." "I'm serious. The transfer was linked to something much larger." "What exactly?" "I don't know. But people at very high levels are nervous." That sentence hit me like a truck. People at very high levels are nervous. Not angry, not confused, nervous. And suddenly everything started making sense. The frozen accounts, the endless investigations, the pressure, the questions, the attempts to damage my reputation. What if this wasn't about finding the truth? What if it was about controlling the story? Marcus lowered his voice even further. "Ethan, yeah? If I were you, I'd start documenting everything." A chill ran through me. "What aren't you telling me?" "I can't." "Marcus, I have to go." The call ended. Just like that. I stared at my phone. My heart pounding, my mind racing. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized something terrifying. The $22 million wasn't the real problem. The real problem was whoever wanted the truth buried, and they had already decided I was in the way. The smear campaign begins. I couldn't sleep that night. Marcus's words kept repeating in my head. Someone important is involved. People at very high levels are nervous. Start documenting everything. The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I became. For weeks, I had been assuming the bank was simply making mistakes. Maybe there was confusion. Maybe there was too much paperwork. Maybe somebody somewhere had handled the situation badly. But now I wasn't so sure. I sat at my kitchen table long after midnight, looking through emails, screenshots, phone records, and notes. Every conversation, every call, every strange interaction, I saved everything. I created folders, backups, copies. If somebody was trying to protect themselves, I wanted proof of everything that happened. At the time, I didn't know how important that decision would become. Because only a few days later, the attacks started, and they were far worse than anything I expected. The first sign came from one of my oldest clients, a woman named Rebecca. She had trusted me with her company's finance for nearly 8 years. She called, sounding uncomfortable, not angry, not upset, just uncomfortable. "Ethan, can I ask you something?" Of course, there was a pause. Then she asked quietly, "Are you being investigated?" My stomach tightened. "What?" "I heard some rumors." "What rumors?" Another pause. The kind people make when they're afraid to say something out loud. Then she finally answered. "Someone said, 'Federal investigators are looking into your business.'" For several seconds, I couldn't speak. I felt like all the air had been pulled from the room. Because I knew exactly what was happening. Someone was talking. Someone was spreading information. And none of it was true. I explained everything to Rebecca. The accidental transfer, my phone call to the bank, the frozen accounts, the endless reviews. Thankfully, she believed me. But not everyone did. Within 2 weeks, 3 clients terminated their contracts, not because of evidence, not because of wrongdoing, because of rumors. Rumors spread faster than facts. They always do, and whoever was behind this understood that perfectly. Every day seemed to bring another problem, another strange call, another suspicious question. Another client suddenly acting nervous. It felt coordinated, calculated. Like someone was slowly tightening a rope around my business, trying to choke it without ever touching it directly. Then things got even worse. One morning I arrived at the office and found 2 employees waiting outside my door. Both looked concerned. One of them stepped forward. "Ethan, we need to talk." I unlocked the office and invited them inside. Neither sat down. They remained standing. That alone told me something was wrong. Finally, one of them spoke. "We've been contacted." "By who?" "We're not sure." "What do you mean?" The employee looked uncomfortable. "We received calls asking questions about you." The second employee nodded. "They wanted to know if you'd ever hidden transactions." My chest tightened. The first employee continued. "They asked whether we trusted you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Whoever was doing this wasn't satisfied with attacking my reputation outside the company. Now they were targeting my employees, my own team, people who worked beside me every day, people who knew my character better than anyone. I explained the situation honestly, every detail, nothing hidden, nothing exaggerated. When I finished, both employees seemed reassured. But the damage was done, because now fear had entered the building. And once fear enters, it spreads. That evening, I sat alone in my office long after everyone left. The lights were off. The building was silent. I kept to ask myself the same question. Why go this far? Why target me? Why not simply reverse the transfer and move on? None of it made sense. Unless the transfer itself wasn't the problem. That thought refused to leave my mind. Maybe somebody wasn't trying to recover money. Maybe somebody was trying to hide where it came from. And if that was true, I was standing directly between them and their secret. A week later, another piece of the puzzle appeared. completely unexpectedly. I received a certified letter from the bank's legal department. My hands actually shook opening it. After everything that had happened, I expected another threat, another accusation, another demand. Instead, what I found confused me even more. The letter stated that the funds had officially been removed from my account. That part wasn't surprising. But then I noticed something strange. The transfer destination wasn't listed. There was no explanation, no final report, no details about the source. Nothing. Just a statement saying the money had been removed. $22 million had appeared and disappeared, and nobody seemed willing to explain where it came from. That wasn't normal. Not even close. The more I looked at the document, the more suspicious I became. I decided it was time to hire help, real help. The next morning, I contacted an attorney. His name was Daniel Brooks. He specialized in financial disputes and corporate investigations. The moment he heard the story, he became interested, very interested. We met that afternoon. I brought everything: emails, records, letters, screenshots, phone logs, every document I had collected. Daniel spent nearly 3 hours reviewing everything. Occasionally, he would stop, read some then continue. By the end of the meeting, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "This is unusual." "How unusual?" He smiled slightly. "Let's just say I've never seen anything exactly like this." That wasn't reassuring. Daniel pointed toward one of the documents. "Who told your clients you were under investigation?" "I don't know." "Who contacted your employees?" "I don't know." "Who froze your accounts without explanation?" "The bank." He nodded slowly, then looked directly at me. "I think someone is trying to create a narrative." A narrative. The word stuck with me, because that was exactly what it felt like. A story. A carefully designed story. One where I was cast as the problem. One where nobody asked difficult questions. One where the real truth stayed hidden. Daniel agreed to investigate, and over the next month, things started moving. Quietly at first, then very quickly. The first breakthrough came from a source neither of us expected. A former employee from the bank reached out anonymously. No name, no phone number, just an encrypted email. Attached was a single document, nothing else, no explanation, no message, just one file. I opened it with Daniel sitting beside me. The moment we saw the contents, we looked at each other. Neither of us spoke, because we both understood what we were seeing. It wasn't proof, not yet. But it was enough to raise serious questions. The document contained internal communications discussing the transfer, emails, meeting notes, references, and one sentence stood out above everything else. Public exposure must be avoided at all costs. I read it 3 times, then 4, then 5. Public exposure. Exposure of what? That was the question. The document didn't say. But somebody clearly feared attention. Daniel printed the file and placed it on his desk. Then he looked at me. "This changes things." "How?" "Because now we know they're worried." I remembered Marcus saying the same thing. People at very high levels are nervous. Now there was evidence supporting it. Not complete evidence, but enough to make us look deeper here. The investigation accelerated. More requests, more records, more questions. And with every step, resistance increased. Documents disappeared. Requests were delayed. People suddenly became unavailable. Meetings were canceled. Doors closed. It felt like somebody was cleaning up behind us, removing traces before we could find them. Then came the moment that truly changed everything. The moment I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was leaving my office when a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Nothing unusual about that. Except it didn't park, it simply stopped. The driver's window lowered slightly. A man I had never seen before looked at me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You're asking questions you don't need answered." Every nerve in my body went alert. "What?" The man didn't repeat himself. Instead, he smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that makes your stomach sink. Then he spoke again. "You've already done enough." The SUV pulled away and disappeared. Just like that. No threats, no names, no explanations, but the message was clear. Someone knew what I was doing. Someone was watching. And someone wanted me to stop. I stood there in the rain long after the vehicle disappeared, thinking, processing, trying to understand what had just happened. Then a strange feeling came over me. For weeks I had been scared, confused, overwhelmed. But standing there, watching the rain fall across an empty parking lot, something changed. Because if they were sending warnings, if they were monitoring me, if they were trying this hard to silence me, then we must have been getting close, very close. Close enough to make powerful people uncomfortable. Close enough to make them nervous. And close enough that they were willing to risk exposing themselves. I looked down at my phone. A new message had arrived from Daniel. Only 6 words. 6 words that made my heart race. I found where the money started. And suddenly, everything was about to change. The message from Daniel stayed on my screen for several seconds. I found where the money started. I read it again, then again. For weeks, every road had led to dead ends, every question had been met with silence. Every attempt to find answers had been blocked. Now, for the first time, it sounded like we had finally uncovered something real. I called Daniel immediately. He answered on the first ring. "Where are you?" he asked. "Still at the office. Come now." His voice was calm, but I could hear something underneath it. Excitement, concern, maybe both. Either way, I knew this wasn't something he wanted to discuss over the phone. 20 minutes later, I walked into his office. The moment I entered, I noticed stacks of papers covering his desk, documents, reports, bank records, printouts with highlighted sections. Daniel closed the door behind me. Then he handed me a folder. "Read page 4. I flipped through the pages until I found it. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then I saw the account, history, and my stomach dropped. The $22 million hadn't come from a private individual. It hadn't come from some wealthy investors, and it definitely hadn't come from a simple banking mistake. The transfer had passed through multiple corporate accounts before reaching mine. Too many accounts, too many unusual movements, too many layers. It looked almost as if someone had been trying to hide where the money actually originated. I looked up. Daniel nodded. "You see it too. Why move it through so many accounts?" "That's the question." I stared at the records. Each transfer seemed designed to make the trail harder to follow. One account sent money to another. That account sent it somewhere else. Then another, and another, before eventually ending up in my account. It was like someone had created a maze nobody was supposed to navigate, but somehow Daniel had. "What happens now?" I asked. Daniel leaned back. "Now we find out who owns the first account." That sounded simple. It wasn't. The next 3 weeks were some of the most frustrating of my life. Every time we thought we were close, another obstacle appeared. Records were missing. Ownership information was hidden. Requests were delayed. People stopped returning calls. The deeper we dug, the more resistance we encountered. And that resistance told us something important. We were getting closer. People don't panic when you're wrong. They panic when you're right. One afternoon, Daniel called me unexpectedly. His voice sounded different, more serious than usual. "I need you to come in." "What happened?" "We found a name." My heart immediately started racing. A name. After all this time, we finally had one. I arrived less than 30 minutes later. Daniel slid a document across the desk. I looked down, then froze. Because the name wasn't what I expected. Not even close. It belonged to a large consulting company, a company with government contracts, corporate contracts, international business relationships. The kind of company most people would never question. The kind of company that looked completely respectable from the outside. But according to the records, their account sat at the very beginning of the transfer chain. I stared at the page. "You're sure?" Daniel nodded. "As sure as we can be." "Why would they be involved?" "That's what we're trying to determine." For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel said something that sent a chill through me. "This may not have been an accident." I looked up. "What do you mean?" He folded his hands. "I think your account may have been chosen." The room suddenly felt smaller. "Chosen? Yes. Why would anyone choose me?" Daniel shook his head. "I don't know yet." But the idea refused to leave my mind. What if he was right? What if the money hadn't landed in my account by chance? What if someone had deliberately sent it there? That possibility changed everything. Because an accident creates confusion. A deliberate transfer creates purpose. And purpose means someone had a plan. The question was, what plan? Over the next few days, I became obsessed with finding answers. I reviewed every client, every business relationship, every contract, every interaction from the previous year. I searched for connections. Anything that might explain why my account had become the center of this nightmare. Then one evening I found something. At first it seemed insignificant, a small consulting project from 18 months earlier. Nothing major. A short-term financial review for a company I barely remembered. But when I looked deeper, I noticed something strange. That company had later been acquired. And the acquiring company? It had direct business relationships with the consulting firm Daniel had identified. I sat back in my chair, my pulse quickening. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe not. The next morning, I showed everything to Daniel. He studied the information carefully. Then he slowly nodded. "This is the first real connection we've found. It wasn't enough to prove anything, but it was enough to continue pulling the thread. And once we started pulling, the entire sweater began to unravel. More names emerged. More relationships, more hidden connections. Individually, each piece looked harmless. Together, they painted a very different picture. A picture nobody wanted exposed. Then came another anonymous message. This time, it wasn't an email. It was a package. No return address. No identifying information. Just a plain envelope left at Daniel's office. Inside was a flash drive. Nothing else. No note. No explanation. Just the drive. Daniel and I looked at each other. Neither of us touched it immediately. Because by then, we'd learned something. Whenever information arrived anonymously, it was usually important. Very important. Eventually, Daniel connected the drive to an isolated computer. We opened the files, and what we found left us speechless. Meeting records, internal presentations, communication logs, documents that were clearly never meant to leave private hands. Some files referenced financial movements. Others discussed risk management, but one particular document stood out. A presentation slide containing a single sentence. Transfer recipient remains unaware of strategic value. I read the line repeatedly. Transfer recipient, that was me. Strategic value. What did that even mean? Why would my account have strategic value? The more I thought about it, the more disturbing it became. Because that sentence suggested something horrifying. Someone's had known exactly where the money was going. Someone had anticipated the transfer, and someone had been discussing it long before it happened. This wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. And it certainly wasn't a simple banking error. For the first time, I realized I may have been used. Used as a shield. Used as a distraction. Used as a convenient target. If investigators focused on me, nobody would ask questions elsewhere. If rumors destroyed my reputation, nobody would look deeper. If my business collapsed under pressure, the story would end with me, and whoever orchestrated everything could walk away untouched. The realization made me furious. For months, I had defended myself, explained myself, proved my honesties over and over again. Meanwhile, the people responsible had been hiding behind lawyers, corporations, and complicated financial structures. That night, I made a decision. I was done playing defense. For months, they had controlled the narrative. Now it was my turn. Daniel agreed. The evidence still wasn't enough for a courtroom, but it was more than enough to attract attention. Real attention, the kind powerful people fear. Over the next several days, we prepared everything. Every document, every timeline, every communication, every record. Thousands of pages, months of work, every piece carefully organized, because once we moved forward, there would be no turning back. Then, just as we were preparing to act, Daniel received a phone call. I knew something was wrong the moment he answered. His expression changed instantly. He listened for nearly a minute without speaking, then he slowly hung up. The room fell silent. "What happened?" I asked. Daniel looked directly at me. His face had gone pale. "They know about the flash drive." A cold wave ran through my body. "How? I don't know." "What did they say?" Daniel hesitated, then answered quietly. "They want everything returned." The silence that followed felt endless, because we both understood what that meant. The people behind this sisters weren't worried anymore. They were scared. And scared people make dangerous decisions. Daniel walked toward the window. For several moments, he simply stared outside. Then he turned back toward me. "What I'm about to tell you isn't going to be easy to hear." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, then spoke the words that changed everything. "The person connected to this transfer isn't just powerful." He paused. His eyes locked onto mine. "He's one of the most influential businessmen in the country." The room seemed to spin, because suddenly the scale of everything became clear. The pressure, the threats, the cover-up, the rumors, the investigations, none of it had been random. I hadn't stumbled into a mistake. I had stumbled into a secret, and now the wrong people knew I was getting close to the truth. The room fell silent after Daniel's words. "He's one of the most influential businessmen in the country." For a moment, I just stared at him, not because I didn't understand what he had said, because I finally understood everything. The pressure, the frozen accounts, the rumors, the attacks on my business, the anonymous warnings, the mysterious calls, the black SUV. None of it had been random. I had accidentally stepped into a game I wasn't supposed to see, and the people playing it had resources far beyond anything I could imagine. The smart thing would have been to walk away. Protect what was left of my business, protect my family, protect myself. That's exactly what they expected me to do. But after everything they had put me through, I couldn't do that. Not anymore. Because this had stopped being about $22 million a long time ago. Now it was about truth. And I wanted answers. The following week, Daniel and I met with a group of independent investigators and financial experts, people with reputations strong enough that they couldn't easily be ignored. For nearly 6 hours, we presented everything: the transfer records, the communication logs, the anonymous documents, the timeline, every piece of evidence we had gathered. When the meeting ended, nobody spoke immediately. The experts sat quietly reviewing notes. Eventually, one of them leaned forward. "What you've uncovered deserves attention." Another nodded. "This shouldn't disappear." For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a while. Hope. Real hope. Not because we had won, but because we finally had people willing to look at the facts. Over the next several weeks, information began spreading through professional circles. Not rumors, not gossip, documents, questions, requests for explanations, and something interesting happened. The people who had spent months acting confident suddenly became very nervous. Statements changed, stories changed, explanations changed. People who once refused to answer questions now wanted meetings, lots of meetings. One executive requested a private discussion, then another, then another. Suddenly everyone wanted to talk. The timing wasn't a coincidence. They could feel control slipping away, and they hated it. One afternoon, I received an offer, a very large offer, an offer that arrived through attorneys. The message was simple: the disputes could be resolved. The investigations could stop. The legal issues could disappear. All I had to do was sign a confidentiality agreement and walk away. In return, I would receive enough money to completely rebuild my business, enough money to erase every financial problem they had caused. Years earlier, I probably would have accepted. At the very least, I would have considered it. But not now. Not after everything. Not after watching employees worry about losing jobs. Not after watching clients disappear because of lies. Not after months of being treated like a criminal for doing the honest thing. I rejected the offer immediately. Daniel smiled when I told him. I had a feeling you would. The truth was simple. If they were offering that much money, they were terrified. And terrified people rarely offer deals unless they think they're losing. Then came the moment that changed everything. A regulatory review was launched, an official review. Not because of me alone, not because of Daniel, because too many questions now existed to ignore. Investigators began requesting records. Independent auditors became involved. Outside experts started examining financial activity. The walls that had protected certain people for years were finally beginning to crack. And once cracks appear, they tend to spread. Over the following months, more information surfaced. Some of it confirmed our suspicions. Some of it revealed things we never expected. Financial movements, questionable reporting, internal decisions that looked very different once examined closely. The story became larger than anyone imagined, much larger. The powerful businessman at the center of everything tried to distance himself. Publicly, he claimed ignorance. Privately, according to sources, he was scrambling. Former allies stopped defending him. Business partners became cautious. People who once stood beside him began stepping away, because loyalty often disappears when consequences arrive. And consequences were arriving quickly. I remember one particular morning. I was sitting at home drinking coffee when my phone exploded with notifications. Calls, messages, emails, dozens of them. Then hundreds. I turned on the television, and there it was, the story. Not my story, the entire story. National coverage, professional analysis, public scrutiny, questions nobody could avoid anymore. The truth was finally reaching daylight. For months, I had felt alone. Now millions of people were asking the same questions I had been asking from the beginning. What happened? Who knew? And why had an honest account holder been treated like the problem? The public reaction was overwhelming. People were shocked, not by the transfer, but by everything that happened afterward. The attempts to shift blame, the pressure campaign, the reputation attacks, the efforts to silence questions. The very things that had nearly destroyed my life became impossible to hide. And once public attention arrived, everything accelerated. Several internal reviews expanded. Corporate leadership changed. Executives resigned. Others quietly disappeared from public view. The businessman whose name had terrified so many people suddenly looked far less powerful than before. Because influence depends on perception. And perception had changed. Dramatically. One afternoon, nearly a year after the transfer first appeared, in my account I received an unexpected call. The number was unfamiliar. I answered anyway. A familiar voice spoke. Marcus, the compliance employee who had first warned me. For a moment neither of us said anything. Then he laughed. Not nervously this time, relieved. You were right, I smiled. No, I looked out the window, at the sunlight falling across my backyard, at a peaceful afternoon that felt impossible only months earlier. Then I answered, I just refused to stop asking questions. Marcus laughed again. You know what's funny? What? If you had kept the money, everyone would have focused on the money. I thought about that, and realized he was right. The biggest irony of all was that my honesty had triggered everything. If I had acted selfishly, the story might have ended immediately. Instead, I reported the transfer, and that single decision exposed problems far bigger than $22 million. After the call ended, I sat quietly for a long time, thinking about the previous year, thinking about everything that had happened. The fear, the stress, the uncertainty, the anger. There had been moments when I wanted to quit. Moments when I questioned myself. Moments when I wondered whether telling the truth had been worth it. Looking back, I finally knew the answer. Yes, absolutely yes. Because eventually truth has a strange way of surviving. People can delay it, hide it, distract from it, attack those who speak it. But keeping it buried forever is much harder than most people think. My business eventually recovered. Slowly at first, then steadily. Some former clients returned, new clients arrived, and something unexpected happened. People trusted me more than before. Not because I was perfect, not because I won some great victory, because they knew I had been tested. And when the test came, I chose honesty even when it cost me. Years later, people still ask what it felt like seeing $22 million suddenly appear in my account. They expect some exciting answer, something dramatic, something unbelievable. But my answer is always the same. The money wasn't the most shocking part. The shocking part was discovering how many people were willing to punish honesty when honesty became inconvenient. That's what stayed with me. That's what changed me. And that's the lesson I hope people remember. Because character isn't revealed when things are easy. Character is revealed when doing the right thing becomes expensive. When telling the truth creates problems. When honesty costs more than silence. Anyone can do the right thing when there's a reward waiting. The real test comes when there isn't. The real test is when standing up might cost everything. I never wanted to become part of a story like this. I never wanted attention. I never wanted a fight. I just made a phone call, one honest phone call, and that simple decision changed my life forever. But if I had to do it all again, I'd make the same call. Every single time. Because $22 million can change a bank account. But integrity changes something much more important. And unlike money, nobody can take that away. A wrong transfer should have been a simple mistake. Instead, it exposed secrets that powerful people wanted buried. They tried to freeze my accounts, destroy my reputation, and scare me into silence. But the moment the truth reached the public, everything changed. The people who seemed untouchable suddenly had nowhere left to hide. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon. More dramatic real-life revenge and betrayal stories are coming next. And trust me, some of them are even wilder than this one.